Hello, healers. My name is Ben, and this is the Moss Report. We're here today with my father, author and founder of the Moss Report, Dr. Ralph W. Moss. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Ben.
So, I wanted to talk to you today about this substance that I've read some of your writings about, known as turmeric or curcumin. And there's a few aspects to this that I'd like to know more about. But I think the first question that comes to mind is, why does this have two names? Is it two different plants or two different substances? Turmeric and curcumin? What's the story with that?
So curcumin is an ingredient, a component of the plant turmeric. It's a chemical, a naturally occurring chemical, which is about 4 or 5% by weight of turmeric. So if you buy turmeric in the store in a grocery store, you'll see it under tea in the list of spices common. If you were to take that in the lab and extract the different chemicals that are in it, about 5% of the weight of the turmeric would be curcumin.
I see. So that is the substance that ostensibly you're saying has the benefit, the health benefit. Is that right?
Well, there are a number of different chemicals of the related chemical family. They call those curcuminoids. They're like curcumin. Oid just refers to something being like something else. And so probably if you bought curcumin in the health food store or over the internet, it would say total curcuminoids. It wouldn't probably be pure curcumin because sometimes, many times, there is the main substance, the main chemical, and then there are other similar ones. The other similar ones are additive to the main one, and maybe they're helpers too.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. That's really enlightening to know about turmeric and curcumin. I kind of always thought they were the same thing, but
Right.
now I understand that curcumin is an extract from turmeric root.
Yeah, it's a single ingredient.
So I guess that leads me to want to ask you this, which is that if the curcumin only makes up 5% or so of the turmeric, if I'm using it medicinally or for health purposes, would I even want to bother having the natural plant? Does it make a difference, or should I really just focus on getting the extract into my body because that's the piece, that's the substance that is going to make a difference?
Well, I think that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer. The vast majority of people in the world who consume curcumin consume it as part of the plant, as part of the spice rack of their houses, and the result of those types of diets that include curcumin are pretty fantastic. The gap between,
Sorry, what do you mean the results of?
in other words, if you look at cancer rates
Okay.
in places which traditionally used a lot of turmeric in their cooking and still, to a great degree, still do,
Mm-hmm.
the rate, I was looking recently at some statistics on prostate cancer,
Mm-hmm.
something I'm sure we'll talk a lot about in this.
Well, yes, and it's of particular relevance to me. I'm actively trying to avoid it.
Yeah, good. But the rate of serious prostate cancer in a country with a very high consumption of turmeric, which would be like Sri Lanka, the formerly known as Ceylon, versus some parts of the United States like Washington, D.C., especially with large African American populations, can be 100 to 200 times difference. That's right.
200%?
Times, not even 200%. I could quote you the
So this
statistics.
was an actual study that was done.
In 2002, well, let's talk about colon cancer.
Yeah.
Colon cancer was virtually unknown in Sri Lanka, which is chosen as a country, fairly traditional country. It hasn't been quite as much converted to the American fast food
I,
diet.
can
Uh,
I,
yeah,
but I'm sorry to interrupt.
yeah.
I want to, if you're saying that though, where does that information come from? You're saying that they had this low rate of
Oh,
colon cancer.
I'll provide you with that.
Okay, so that's part of the information that we're going to put
So
links to.
the breast cancer death rate in Sri Lanka was 1.6 per 100,000. In the US, it was 32.7 per 100,000. That's a 20-fold greater risk of, of breast cancer in the US than in Sri Lanka. The prostate cancer risk
Really?
was zero point 0.2 per 100,000 men. Of course, it's men. But in the US, it was 23.5. That's 100-fold greater, 100-fold, not 100%, which would only be a doubling. It's 100-fold greater risk, 100 times more likely to get prostate cancer in the US than in Sri Lanka back in 2002. The prostate cancer death rate was even higher among African Americans. In Washington, D.C., with its large African American population, the prostate cancer death rate was 40.1 per 100,000. Remember, I said that it was 0.2 per 100,000 in Sri Lanka. That's a 200-fold, more than even, greater risk than was seen in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
So that's I have these articles and stuff, and I can document this.
Okay, well, we'll put those links. I definitely want to share where that science lives
Yeah,
with our readers and our listeners.
sure.
Excuse me. Wow. I mean, what a dramatic statistic.
Yeah.
The skeptic in me, which I get from my parents, has me, of
Trained
course,
you well.
wanting to. I'm sorry.
Trained you well.
Yeah, right.
Uh-oh.
But no, I would want to see that. Like, I guess I would say, do they even keep really good records in Sri Lanka? I don't know. I mean, to me, I'm pretty much entrenched in Western sort of suburban middle class culture here. I don't really have a very great sense of the how advanced one community is, and I
Well,
apologize to all the Sri Lankans out there. I don't mean to disparage
no.
their medical system or medical record keeping system, but I
Yeah.
would want to know if I'm saying this factually and I'm saying there was this important statistic, I would want to feel confident that the information came from a reputable
Of
source.
course. And these two things, cancer statistics, have been massaged and worked over by the UN for decades and other international
What do you
organizations.
mean by that?
So the sources of information come through UN agencies like the UNESCO and the World Health Organization, and also from multinational non-governmental organizations. And people have been thinking deeply about these questions for decades. And so they're fairly reliable. Countries that are not doing so well in terms of keeping records are given encouragement and funding by the other countries, because we need to know this. We need to know how do cancer rates compare country to country. But I think what's known to scholars uh, about the cancer incidence rates hasn't filtered down to the general public as a rule. So you
Mm-hmm.
have these extraordinary differences in cancer rates. And
Mm-hmm.
the more so called civilized or sophisticated societies become, That's to say, the more westernized they become, the more the cancer problem increases.
Mm,
So, in a way, the explorer Stephenson wrote a book about 60 years ago called "Cancer: A Disease of Civilization," but he put a question mark at the end of the title
hmm.
because he wasn't a doctor and he had some modesty about, but
Yeah,
he knew from his explorations in the Arctic region,
yeah.
the polar region, North Pole, that there was very little, if any, cancer among Eskimo people, Inuit people,
Hmm.
in the time that he went there. So we
Okay.
know that so-called civilization, and it's really just a so-called, defined by the people who invented it, basically,
Hmm.
um, which includes canned foods and processed foods, and now, of course, half the foods that are have sugar added to them or sweeteners added to them. Uh,
Okay.
these diets are associated with high rates of cancer.
I,
So this led to some consideration. These extraordinary numbers coming out of Sri Lanka and other Asian countries. What is it about those people's lifestyles? Because it is a question of lifestyle that decreases their risk of cancer, and conversely, maybe there's something they're doing that we're in the Western world not doing that increases our risk.
yeah, excuse me. That really brings me to the next question that I was going to ask, which is so, okay, so the people in Sri Lanka
Mm-hmm.
have a much lower incidence of colon cancer and breast cancer,
Mm-hmm.
but how does that, or does it, necessarily tie back to the intake of
Yeah.
turmeric root and the
Right.
substance it contains, curcumin?
Yeah.
I mean, you could say it was that, and you could say somebody else could come along and say, "Oh, it's the water that they drink, or it's the
Yeah.
the tropical air, or what have
Right.
you."
And I wouldn't say that it's all curcumin either. I mean, it's unlikely to be, because there's no one magic food that's going to, prevent cancer. Uh,
Right,
but there's something about the lifestyle of people in certain countries
right.
that's very conducive to not developing cancer and to having good longevity and not getting other diseases. So this knowledge has been developing for, half a century. And as people dissected the lifestyle and the diet of people in these countries, one thing that stood out was they eat a lot of curry. Curry, what
Like
gives
every
curry its its
day.
yellow color is turmeric,
Uh-huh. Right.
overwhelmingly, and so that's a sort of becomes a suspect, or if you want to call it that, or becomes something to look at more closely. The more closely they looked at it, it wasn't the only thing in the diet by any means, and the diet itself, the proportion of carbohydrates, the macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fat, that's different. The nature of the fats they use is different. There's a lot of things, a lot of things. There were other things in the diet, though, but turmeric's or slash the so-called active ingredient in turmeric, curcumin,
Curcuminoids.
and very good, curcuminoids, they jumped out because they killed cancer cells in the laboratory.
Okay, yeah.
Other things did too. So I'm not suggesting that, again, our science shows.
Right.
And in this case, yes, curcumin was an outstanding thing in the laboratory. Then when it started to get into human studies, we're talking now about the 70s and the 80s, there was a lot of problems because it turns out that pure curcumin is very poorly absorbed by the
Hmm.
human body. So if
Hmm.
you try to take pure curcumin in its natural form, uh, it works in the lab beautifully, but it doesn't work all that well in human beings.
Hmm.
So why would we still say that it has benefit? And there are some studies I very much want to talk about in this regard.
Hmm.
Um, and the answer is that it needs to be modified. It needs to be modified by other food substances in order for it to be better absorbed.
You're talking about the actual molecules themselves.
Correct. They won't be absorbed through the blood and get to the areas that you need it to get to very well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very, very notoriously poor absorption. It's almost like a
Mm-hmm.
textbook case of poor absorption.
Mm-hmm.
But the first workaround for that, oddly enough, was black pepper. It turned
Mm-hmm.
out that and I imagine that many dishes did have a combination of turmeric and black pepper in their diet.
Mm-hmm.
And there are elements within black pepper called piperine and piperidine
Mm-hmm.
that if you add that to the curcumin, you get about a 20-fold greater absorption.
Mm-hmm.
So that was published. That was a published study, came out of India, as you'd imagine, because
Okay.
Sri Lanka is an island off the coast of India.
Right.
So
And India is very well known for the esteem with which they hold their medical profession, and I'm sure that
correct,
that translates nicely into their
does
research sciences.
absolutely. They have a very, very long-standing, brilliant tradition in medicine, as does the Western world. So um, if you add black pepper in, or not just a twist of your pepper mill, but
Mm.
an actual
A
refinement
dose.
of
Yeah.
pyridine, then you're starting to overcome
So it
the
acts like an enzyme. It kind of helps to break it
yeah.
apart
I
into
don't
its
know.
constituents.
I'm not sure how it works,
Okay.
to be
All
honest.
right.
The study, I don't remember that the study goes into the mechanism,
I see.
but but since that time, other things have been discovered that also enhance uh, the
Efficacy.
absorption.
Hmm.
And the best one actually is fenugreek, which
Okay.
is a veg. It's an Indian. It's an Indian vegetable called meti,
Okay.
MEHTI. I visit an Indian
Can you say that again? Medi?
Meti, MEHTI. Meti,
Okay.
I think I'm pronouncing it right.
Okay.
So I go to an Indian grocery in a town that's about 30 miles from my home. Whenever I go in that direction, I
Hmm.
always make a point to stop at that very nice Indian grocery.
And they have it. Medi is a
So they
substance, or
have
that's the
so they have
fenugreek.
fenugreek seeds.
Okay.
They have medi fresh leaves. It's like spinach. It's like a spinach leaf, and they also have
Hmm.
frozen
Hmm.
medi.
Are these also ingredients that would normally be used inside of a curry?
Could be. I'm not
I mean,
honest. To be
fenugreek.
honest with
I
you,
guess it's going to be up to me. I think to
give it a
now.
try.
I appreciate your sort of tuning me into
Yeah,
these things. I think the practical aspect of actually getting them into your diet is going
yeah,
to be something that we're going to be exploring in other
yeah.
videos and what have you.
Right.
And I also have an Indian grocery that I'm going to be visiting to
Good.
take a deeper dive into some of these ingredients.
Yeah.
While I've got you here talking about them, though, I wanted to stay with this turmeric
Yeah.
topic, and I know we could talk about all these other substances, and we'll have other videos on them. But
Yeah.
I think, for my thinking about this, when I think about the value of foodstuffs, it's always in my mind been sort of the priority has always been to get the natural, most fresh and natural state of ingredients.
Yeah.
But I don't know that that is the best thing to advise to people who are battling cancer diagnoses. So there's kind of two things. One is, okay, there's a study that, or many studies that were done that show that people with a diet that is high in turmeric have a lower incidence of cancer. How does that help someone who's actually in a battle with a diagnosis?
Yeah.
Can it be used sort of medicinally after the fact? Will it not make a difference? I mean, I guess my point is that I don't want to tell our audience to go out and load up on fresh turmeric root and start putting it in everything if it's not really demonstrating value, because it takes a lot of effort to introduce new foods into your diet, and
Yeah.
structure and change things the way you eat and so forth. So I mean, I would like to be able to talk to our viewers and say, hey, here's the thing you ought to do is go, get this substance and start including it. But I want to have some basis for recommending that. I personally love a curry. I love cooking curry. I'm unfamiliar with turmeric root in its natural state. I'm looking forward to sort of exploring
Yeah.
how to get turmeric root into my diet. As I understand, it has healthful
Yeah.
and preventative properties. But
Right.
what if I'm trying to use it in a way that's more in line with how we normally take medicines, e.g., a pill or in some other refined way?
Yeah.
Does it have
Now
value?
you're into right. So you have different camps in the scientific community. Some of them do epidemiological research, population-based research. That's how you look at different populations, as we've just been discussing. Then you have laboratory workers who look in a test tube or in an animal, what happens if we refine this chemical and we give it to these animals. As I said, the laboratory work was fantastic with curcumin, not so great once, and then it moved into the clinical, meaning into the human treatment situation. I would guess, I can't, and I don't have definitive proof of this, but just the broad picture is that when you transition from the preventative to the treatment, two very different. They may be on a on a conveyor belt, but basically, the person doesn't have any diagnosed cancer. They probably don't have an established cancer. They may be in the 40% of the population that's going to get cancer, but they're not there yet. Then it's appropriate to rely on the food, because you're only going to get a little bit of these, but you're going to get all the curcuminoids probably if it was grown properly. So you get a little bit every day, and you'll be doing other things and getting the benefit of those other things. And that creates, in toto, it creates a healthy lifestyle, which is a good protector against cancer. When I say good, this has been summarized 41% of the cancer risk is due to diet and lifestyle. Smoking, tobacco, the main one, of course,
Mm.
but besides that, so you can reduce, the average person can reduce their risk of cancer by 41%. And these are orthodox figures. In other words, this is
Mm.
nothing coming out of alternative medicine. This is
Mhm.
entirely within the scope of conventional thinking, conventional medicine, textbook medicine.
Mm.
So part of that could be uh, adding something like curries and like turmeric as a vegetable or as a root or as a spice. And you can buy it. There's a one market here where I live that has big baskets of
Mhm.
beautiful turmeric for sale.
Mhm.
If you want to,
Mhm.
yeah. But when you get to the treatment point, you've now had a diagnosis
Right.
of cancer, whether you're actively fighting cancer or actively fighting to keep it from coming back.
Yeah.
I think not everybody would agree with it, but I think that then it's appropriate to take supplements,
Mhm.
because I just think the situation is too
Mhm.
dire
Mhm.
to think that the food alone is going to do it. But I think
Mhm.
the combination of a certain kind of diet and certain kinds of foods will impact the cancer.
Mhm.
But but when you get into the dicier situations,
Right.
you need the supplements. I don't think the food is.
Now, I want to say that then.
Yeah.
So, if we're talking about, I'm trying to take this from a very practical point of view,
Yeah.
where so now you've told me that if I have a diagnosis and I'm wanting to have some healthful effect from natural things like a curcumin
Yeah.
supplement, does that also rely, or should I say, would best practices be to take a half a teaspoon of black pepper with your
Oh, no, no,
supplements too? Because I
no.
mean, people need practical approaches to this, and you've said pepperine and
Right.
fenugreek and these other things that are sort of
Right.
enhancing the turmeric effect.
Right.
If you have the curcumin as a supplement, should you be taking other things to help in
Yeah.
with its effect?
You don't have to take it. It'll be there in the supplement that you purchase.
Oh, is that right?
All turmeric supplements today are modified in one way or another to um, enhance the bioavailability of
Oh,
the.
okay.
The one that I have and that I do take sometimes,
That was my next question, but
yeah,
go ahead.
it has a fenugreek leaf
I see.
extract in it,
Okay.
which is coincidentally, I guess you'd say,
Hmm.
that people who eat turmeric naturally also tend to eat medi or fenugreek
Hmm.
leaves or seeds.
Hmm.
So that's nice, and they also tend to have some pepper in their food. The
Hmm.
spices that
Right.
drove human progress and human, or
Now, when you say pepper, does that, so the pepperines that you're talking
yeah,
about, is that a substance that's specific to black pepper
yeah.
or peppercorns?
No, it's also in white pepper.
Okay,
Yeah,
but not in peppers, as in
not in green
chili
pepper.
peppers.
No, there's an
Okay,
entirely different set
I
of
see.
compounds. But I would look for one that was modified because the biggest enhancement of absorption, to my knowledge, comes uh, from the fenugreek added. Now, there's a problem, which is that the it's hard to make comparisons among the products that are out there because although there is research, the research on absorption comes from studies mainly that are conducted by the companies themselves or for the companies. In other words, they probably contract with a laboratory to perform the study.
Companies
So
that produce turmeric or curcumin supplements, you mean?
correct. So
So there's a conflict
it's a
of
pretty
interest.
big market, curcumin,
Okay.
worldwide, and there's a lot of intense competition. And part of that competition is who's got the best absorption.
Right.
And one will say we've got 80 times greater, and the other one say we have 100 times
Right.
greater, and so forth.
Right. Right.
They're probably not lying. I'm not saying that they are, but you have more confidence in studies that come from independent laboratories, and we don't have independent head to head that I'm aware of,
Hmm.
independent head to head comparisons.
Hmm.
But I have an association with Life Extension Foundation. I'm on
Hmm.
their scientific advisory board, and um, it's an unusual entity. It's a foundation, but they also sell vitamins and so
Hmm.
forth. And
Full
uh,
disclosure, we are not sponsored by them.
no,
So
no, and they
we
pay
do
me
it.
no.
No,
They don't pay me a salary for doing that.
maybe they'll consider sponsoring us. I'm not averse to it
I
myself, but anyway,
don't
that's
know.
another
That's
topic.
that's your
So
department.
the one that you take, you're saying that comes
Yeah,
from them
correct. They have a number of different.
fenugreek
Yes,
has fenugreek built in.
right.
Okay,
Yeah, and we could put a link if you want to
yeah,
their.
I will, and
It's
it'll be an affiliate
being
link,
the
I think,
only
too,
far
because
from being the only good one. It's just that I, I've had good experience over like 10 years in being on their board, and
Mhm.
so I trust them.
If you're new to the Moss Report, you may not know that Dr. Moss was diagnosed with prostate cancer a number of years ago. Thankfully, at this time, he's in remission, I guess you'd say, no evidence of disease.
Mhm.
And that's a definite conversation that we're going to have another time. I want to get into that a little deeper,
Yeah,
as I'm also trying to avoid being genetically close to you.
yeah,
We may have a propensity towards prostate cancer, and I'm actively trying to do things to prevent. But right now, I'd like to talk to you about what you did when you had your diagnosis. I should say, did you include turmeric, curcumin, and what have you in your diet and your routine as part of your healing process?
yes, I did. I did.
Can you describe how you did that?
Two capsules per day of life extension, curcumin elite. I think it was at that time. That was the product. So yes, it was part of it. Um, Now we're talking about this happened coming up on 8 years ago. What I was the,
As of 2023, March 2023.
correct. So
Okay.
it was 2015 November, about October, November.
Hmm.
So um, but I did other things too.
Okay, well, we'll talk about other things,
Yeah,
but for the
yeah,
sake of
it
our
was
audience
part
and
of
who are tuning in to learn a little bit more on this
yeah,
topic, so that was it. So you didn't actually um, start cooking with it. It was
not
more of
particular,
just
right?
an attempt to bring natural substances into your supplement routine that you felt had value.
Yeah,
Not a costly substance, I imagine.
no,
Okay.
no,
And anything anybody who is going to get started taking it might need to know about. Did it have any noticeable effect on anything? Your breath, your skin pigmentation, your digestion, anything of any kind that
no,
someone should be aware of?
no. It didn't. Not that I can recall. But I did want to talk about one study that came out long after my diagnosis, but that to me is very important, very,
Okay.
very important. And this one gives me a great deal of hope and a great deal of excitement. Came from Leicester, England, in a cancer center there, which um, where it's a rare study that actually tries to add a single nutrient to chemotherapy in a randomized way. Not that one would necessarily have to take the chemotherapy, but it does give us a good reference point for what happens when you add something like curcumin to standard chemo. So the patients were all colorectal cancer patients, advanced state, and they were receiving a combination of um, four drugs called Folfox chemotherapy. That's folinic acid, or three drugs, excuse me, folinic acid, 5-FU, and oxaliplatin. Pretty heavy duty chemo, right? And some of them got supplements of curcumin every day, and then they looked at the outcome of in terms of progression-free survival and overall survival. And this uh, could be quantified in terms of how many days on average the people lived after they got uh, either just Folfox or what they called QFox, which is curcumin plus the Folfox. And the quality of life was about the same in both groups. The neurotoxicity was about the same. Um, they could detect the curcumin in the bloodstream of most of the patients who were getting the QFOX. But here's the thing: the hazard ratio for progression-free survival was
So what
50.
now?
So this means there's a 43% increase in terms of the lack of progression of the disease. That's one thing. But the most important figure, and this is sort of buried in the paper, is that the overall survival among the people who got who just got the chemo was a median of 200 days, and in the people who got the chemo plus a couple of capsules of curcumin was 502 days. I'll repeat that. The median overall survival, the time they lived, was a median of 200 days. These were advanced colorectal cancer patients, and 502 days. So from taking those two little pills of curcumin, the people who on average got 302 extra days of life from taking that. This was done in Great Britain. It was a randomized trial. It's the highest, among the highest levels of scientific, validation.
Under the banner of their national health program.
Yeah, it was done as a clinical trial within the NHS. Yeah,
at Leicester. Okay, so we'll have a link to that study if anybody wants to take a look at their data, the raw data. Wow,
I feel
very actionable, because I mean we're talking about a substance that has essentially no potential downside that anybody has documented that I'm aware of.
Right.
I've certainly never heard of it.
Ben, at the same time around the same time that this study was being done and was being conducted, we had a big breakthrough in our understanding of curcumin and other natural agents, namely, and this is going to be a whole nother area for us to talk about in our conversations, the understanding that curcumin kills cancer stem cells. And chemotherapy doesn't kill cancer stem cells. Chemotherapy kills ordinary cells, so-called daughter cells, or just run-of-the-mill bulk cells within a tumor. This is a whole big discussion we have to have about the hierarchy of danger within a tumor itself. But at the peak of the pyramid of cancer cell types are these special cells called cancer stem cells. Right. And they drive the cancer, and they're very hard to kill. And the things that have been traditionally used to defeat cancer defeat the bulk cells, the base of the pyramid. And they don't get at the cancer stem cells. But natural agents, as fate would have it, natural agents do. And so look what happened. You took these people who were basically very advanced colorectal cancer. That's why they were in this, this clinical trial.
Right.
And exactly what you'd expect. The chemo was very ineffective. You add in to that chemo, you add in the natural agent, curcumin, you more than double the survival.
Right.
And so we start to think, well, what would happen if they just got the curcumin? We don't know, because you can't do that experiment. That's considered unethical to do.
Well, I have a lot of questions about cancer stem cells, but as you mentioned, it's a topic for another conversation, and several other conversations, I think, as well. But cancer stem cells and the effect that curcumin has on them, is that something that relates to prevention, or is it really something that relates to someone with a diagnosis?
Well, I don't think we know the answer to that question.
Good. I like asking questions.
Well, that's fine. Well, that's good. That's good.
I'm trying to get there.
That's when I got my start as a science writer. I knew I was good at it because the scientists kept saying to me, "Well, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to." So I thought,
I'm going to be trying to come up with questions that you don't know the answers to. It's not easy.
Because I've thought deeply about many of these topics, and so I've asked the same question myself. Yeah. But I must express a personal quirk of my personality in that I'm absolutely flummoxed by the fact that there could be a finding like this from an the English speaking country,
Hmm.
Great
Hmm.
Britain, which has
Right.
a world famous medical system.
Yeah.
And nobody seemed to care. I would expect you in a normal sane world, you would think that the world would come to a halt while everybody suddenly said, "Oh my God, you could double the survival of people with advanced cancer by giving them 2 curcumin pills." But nothing
You're
happened. Nothing happened. It didn't even make it into the new edition of the DeVita textbook.
I'm smiling. It's not funny, but
Yeah,
I'm smiling because of how many memories I have
yeah,
of this state of disbelief
yeah.
that we have experienced
Right.
together as a family, you individually as a science writer, but
Yeah,
for us growing up around your analysis of studies, starting as far back as the original study of Laetrile, which is another topic we can discuss at length.
sure.
But I think that you felt similarly in that here was a natural substance that in the laboratory and in a study that was done by an esteemed researcher that had lots of things that said, hey, look, there's value here. And you would think that because there was value in that substance, that it would naturally trigger a whole daisy chain of further studies into it. And then when it doesn't happen, it's just a real head scratcher. So I hear what you're saying. I relate back to a lot of other sort
Yeah,
of experiences like this, and we don't really need to start having the conversation as to the whys
not yet.
that
Right.
exists. It's
Yeah,
enough that we are aware of it and that we're sharing it with our readers, and hopefully, the value of these studies will spread,
yeah,
and the value and benefits of these natural substances that can help heal
yeah,
will be understood a little bit better, and hopefully
yeah.
lead to further studies as we would like to see, both of curcumin, other things, as well
Right.
as going back and taking a good look at things like amygdalin. Um,
Yeah,
so I think I'd like to, just wrap this up for now. I think
yeah,
we've talked for a good bit about this. It's a lot to digest, not to make a pun.
yeah,
Um, but I think I would like to summarize this for our audience for preventative purposes. In other words, for health purposes,
yeah.
for cancer prevention, including a regular, steady supply of turmeric root in a natural form if you can get it, rather than a powdered, I would
Mhm,
expect would be good.
mhm,
And also to enhance that with pepperine in the form of black and white pepper,
mhm.
and also using fenugreek. Those dietary measures will have or should have a good preventative effect in the body.
Yeah,
For those people who are dealing with a diagnosis, you would look to be including a more concentrated form of this substance in the form of a capsulated curcumin product,
yeah.
preferably with this other agent, fenugreek, or some other what was the word, enhancement of
Yeah, an adjuvant. Yeah,
an adjuvant. Hmm.
yeah.
So that's the upshot of this episode of the Moss Report. Any last thoughts?
No, I'm looking forward to exploring these issues.
I'm a lay person, and I'm
Yeah,
trying to ask the questions that lay people would
of
want
course.
to have answered by you,
Yeah,
who have a much greater scientific knowledge than practically anybody on the subject. So, thanks for answering my questions.
yeah,
It's nice to see you.
yeah.
Thanks for watching. We really appreciate all of your support. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, visit themossreport.com, and I want to thank in particular our Patreon supporters who help us produce this content. For the Moss Report, I'm Ben Moss. How are you healing today?